Welcome to our adult class. We are finishing up the book of Joel. We are in the third chapter. We are in the last few verses as Joel is going to prophesy some things concerning the future of Judah, and I do believe having reference to the church. So again, I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on these 5 or 6 verses, and then we're going into the book of Jonah. And, Jacob, I said we'd do this by quarter, and I have no idea how long I've been. Probably more than a quarter, but after this book of Jonah, change it back to you if the elders want, or I don't know. But anyway, I've kind of enjoyed going through some of these minor prophets. But anyway, that being said, Joel chapter 3, verse 17 is where we're going to begin our study. And as I said, I'm going to go through this maybe a little quicker than normal, and then we're going to look at some introductory work and probably get into the book of Jonah. All right, chapter 3, verse 17 of the book of Joel. So you shall know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. Then Jerusalem shall be holy. No alien shall ever pass through her again. And it will come to pass in that day that the mountains shall drip with new wine, the hills shall flow with milk, and all the brooks of Judah shall be flooded with water. A fountain shall flow from the house of the Lord, and water the valley of Casis. Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom a desolate wilderness, because of violence against the people of Judah, for they have shed innocent blood in their land. But Judah shall abide forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation. For I will acquit them of the guilt of bloodshed, whom I had not acquitted, for the Lord dwells in Zion. Okay, as I said, this is winding down the book of Joel. He is giving some, information concerning the future, and I believe even the church. I think verse 17 suggests as much. I'm going to read verse 17, then we'll discuss it individually, or each verse somewhat individually. So you shall know that I am the Lord your God. Remember, prior to this, he's been talking about the punishment, judgment, and so on. But not now. He said, I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. What is Zion, the holy mountain? It's Jerusalem. Yeah. It has reference to Jerusalem. Then Jerusalem shall be holy, and no alien shall ever pass through her again. If you are a member of the church, if you are a part of Christ's church, you didn't do it by accident. It wasn't by physical birth. Under Judaism, you were part of the lineage of Abraham simply by virtue of birth. Yes, there was the covenant of circumcision that the males were to go through and this kind of thing, but it was by virtue of birth. Well, Christianity is by virtue of birth too, but it's something that no aliens are a part of. It's those who have submitted themselves to the plan of Christ, those who have heeded the message, those who have believed and repented, confessed the name of Christ, and were baptized into Christ. The Lord then added us, Acts 2, to the church. So there's no aliens in it. In other words, no one who shouldn't be there. And concerning the church, is it just Jews? No. Galatians 3, 28 and 29, and about those verses, there's neither male nor female, bond nor free. There's neither Jew nor Greek. We're all one in Christ. So again, it's those who have obeyed the gospel. We have been then added to the church, and we are part of this Zion here, the holy mountain. No alien shall pass through her again. At least that's the way I view this passage.
In John 6:44, it says, no man can come to me except the Father which is sent me draw. And I will raise him up the last day. And 26 says, it is written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught of them, every man therefore that hath heard, and hath learned of the Father, cometh to me. So it shows, in other words, you come to God. You're not going to be a stranger.
Right.
You're going to be, like you said,
No one's a member of the church by accident. Now, obviously, there are individual babies are saved. Those who are mentally incompetent, uh, you know, they're not required to do the things to be saved. But we're talking about people as we are that must obey the gospel. And yes, I think that's the idea. All right, and again, anyone has a comment, jump in. But verse 18. And it will come to pass in that day that the mountains shall drip with new wine, the hills shall flow with milk, and all the brooks of Judah shall be flooded with water. A fountain shall flow from the house of the Lord, and water the valley of, the New King James translates it, Asis. I don't know, how do you pronounce that, Jacob?
I honestly have no clue. I would probably set it as Akakias, but I don't think that's right either.
Well, it's one of those. Achaeus? All right, very well, maybe. Thank you, Mary. All right, what's this mean? Is it literally the mountains are going to drip wine and the hills are going to bring forth milk? Is it literally going to happen? What's that mean? Did he mean it, do you think, to be taken literally?
Well, it's like in the book of Revelation, like that's using symbolic language to talk about spiritual truths, the peace and prosperity of the Lord's kingdom.
I think that's exactly it. How was it before they entered into the promised land? Okay, in other words, when the Jews, because of sin, had wandered in the wilderness for some 40 years. How did they describe the land of Canaan before them? A land that flowed with what? Milk and honey. Did it literally flow with milk and honey? In other words, instead of it being a creek of water here, well, it's a creek of milk, and over here, honey. And no, it was symbolic to describe this place of abundance. In other words, we're going to be blessed, and I think that's the bottom line. We're going to be blessed. Brethren, have you ever thought about what a burden it would have been to live under the Mosaic law? You know, it would have been a tremendous burden for the people. And in the New Testament, it talks about, the liberty, the freedom we have in Christ. And of course, with the blood of Christ, as long as I am striving in my life to walk in the light, and that suggests proper behavior, of course, then that blood of Christ continually applies to my life. We do have the grace and the mercy that without it we would have no hope. So I think he's talking symbolically here that we're going to be blessed. The valley of Achaeus, or however that is to be the word there in the New King James, as I understand it, I looked that up, there was a valley on the other side of the Dead Sea that was typically dry, but the idea, it's going to be watered. It's going to be, in their minds, no doubt it was pictured as a place of blessings. And truly how blessed we are today. I know in our lives there's many difficulties, okay? I know that, the curse that was placed upon man at the very beginning after the sins of Adam and Eve, there's going to be thorns and thistles, and by the sweat of your brow you're going to bring forth, your food. Women had the curse placed upon them in difficulties. They would bring forth children. Their desire would be to their husbands. In other words, what I'm trying to get at, life changed after the Garden of Eden. So yes, part of life is meaning I have to work and labor and provide and so on. But you think of how many blessings we have. Blessings of marriage. And if you had a terrible marriage, I'm sorry. But marriages fail when people fail, either one or the other. But for marriage, to bearing children, to having brethren as we have the relationships with one another, to be able to enjoy all the creation that God has brought forth around us, it is amazing. There's a television show, I think it's put out by the Smithsonian. Is it Ariel? What's the name of that, Connie? Ariel America. You ought to watch that sometimes. It talks about some of the different states and it tells a little bit about the state. But what I'm getting at, it is amazing the world we live in, just here in the U.S., the blessings we have around us. And I think it's meant for our enjoyment. We should never think that this world's our home, but nevertheless, we are blessed in so many ways. Spiritual blessings we have through Christ, as well as the physical things. All right, verse 19, and again, if you have a comment, jump in. Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom a desolate wilderness, because of the violence against the people of Judah, for they have shed innocent blood in their land. Just a reminder that the enemies of God are going to be cursed, but you'll be very blessed. Verse 20 and 21, but Judah shall abide forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation. Is he talking about literal, physical nations? No. Yeah, spiritual, that's right. What did Jesus say about the church? It is spiritual Israel. He said to Peter, I'll build my church upon that confession, and the gates of hell shall never prevail against it. It's always going to exist, of course, until the end of time. Jerusalem, the idea again is spiritual, from generation to generation. Verse 21, he talks about the forgiveness that's going to be there. For I will acquit them of the guilt of bloodshed, whom I had not acquitted, for the Lord dwells in Zion. Once more, under the Old Testament, the blood of bulls and goats, would it take away sin? No, not perfectly. It would roll them forward. In other words, looking forward to the day of Christ. But after Christ, his blood, we have the forgiveness of sins forever. And what a blessing that is to have such. All right, Ted, you look like you're just dying to say something.
No, I do have something on my mind. Just, can you imagine the day after the Day of Atonement? I mean, and you're like, I have to wait another 364 days, they don't have the same calendar. I have a whole other year before I can be free of this. That's a rough existence.
Wouldn't it be though? Yeah. And he's talking about the animal sacrifices and so forth. Each year, annually, they had to go back and go through those things.
And the high priest rolled your sins forward.
Right.
Never forgiven.
They were always there, yes. All right, any other comments on the book of Joel? And we're going to switch gears and go to the book of Jonah. For those of you, if you haven't been in the class, there's a book that I've been on the minor prophets, and he takes these minor prophets in what he believes the chronological order is by year, and he believes Jonah would be the next one. And I'll just follow that for, again, whether he's accurate or not, I don't know. But the book of Jonah is an interesting book. Let's start first with the man Jonah. We only read about his work in one verse of the Old Testament. And I think it's foretelling. I think it tells us something about this man and perhaps what led him in part to make some of the decisions that he made. In 2 Kings chapter 14, verse 25. 2 Kings 14, verse 25. And this is on our introduction to the book of Jonah. The text reads, He restored the territory of Israel from the entrance of Hamath to the sea of Arabah, according to the word of the Lord God of Israel, which he had spoken through his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet who was from Gath Helper. Now, he was talking about, if you go back and read the entire text, he was talking about Jeroboam the second. While he was king, Jonah was prophesying. And it was a time of prosperity in Israel, or Judah here. And if you read, or Israel, but if you read the latter part of that verse 25, which he had spoken through his servant Jonah, so Jonah was working with the king and apparently had a lot of prophecy, perhaps at least this prophecy. I don't know how many more he might have had, but it was favorable. Jacob, you haven't been preaching too long. Would you estimate which is easier, to stand up and preach a sermon on love or to preach the sermon you preached last Sunday?
It's much easier to preach on love than anytime a topic is sensitive.
All right, very true. I've preached sermons before, and when you're up there, you see things you don't. You're looking at the back of someone's head. I mean, if you look at the person in front of you. But I'm up there, the minister, preacher, whoever is looking to the whole audience. I've had people grimace. I've had people get up and storm out. I was holding a gospel meeting at a place. It's not important where, but this man, his facial expression, he was angry, and he gets up and he packs his stuff up and he storms out. You think I enjoyed that? In other words, that's what I want to happen. Of course not. But anytime you're opening up God's Word, and I'll say this and I'll go on. Jacob, I think people have a misconception. I can't tell you how many times I've preached and people come out, most of the time they're not angry, but said, you stepped all over my toes. And I've said to the people before, that happened a lot at Valley, and I stood up there and said, do you think I don't step on my own toes? How would you like to be studying a book that deals with everything? It is this perfect, inspired Word of God, and I'm getting up these lessons, and you think they don't, David, I need to do better in my life in this. It applies to me too. I'm still obligated to preach it because it's my desire was always to preach the whole counsel of God in every aspect. Well, do you think it didn't apply to me too? I had this one lady at Valley, and it was interesting now looking back. It wasn't at the time, but she seemed to think that I always was just, looking at her life, trying to find some flaw, and I'm going to preach on that. And I thought later, I said, boy, your life must have been pretty bad, because every sermon I preached was stepping on her toes, and honestly, she didn't like it. She is the one who would call me, or did call me once, wanting to know what I was going to preach that night. She was going to invite a friend, but if it was something that she didn't think would, her friend would like, she wasn't going to invite her. But regardless, but it's so much easier to preach on peace and love and forgiveness, and we can go through a long list of things. But what was it that King Ahab said about Micaiah? You mentioned that, Jacob, and it brought up his name to have one of the, when we have gospel preachers come on Wednesday night, that's one of the subject matters. But whenever Jehoshaphat, give you the context, 1 Kings 22, Ahab wanted to go to war. Jehoshaphat, the other king of Judah, was a little hesitant, and Jehoshaphat said, let's call the prophets of God and ask them their advice. And obviously I'm paraphrasing this. And all the prophets of Ahab came, and the false prophets said, go, God will bless you. Jehoshaphat said, well, there's one prophet we hadn't heard from. And Ahab said, oh, that's Micaiah. I hate him, because he never prophesies anything good about me. Well, there might have been a reason. But my point in bringing all this up and rambling about this, from what we read, the only time Jonah is mentioned, he was working with Jeroboam II, and God had allowed, even though he was doing evil, God had allowed him to, I'll read again the text, to restore the territory of Israel from the entrance of Hamath to the Sea of Arabah, whatever that is, according to the word of the Lord God of Israel. So he had restored Israel's borders. It was a time of prosperity, according to the other information that I had written. So Jonah was looked on very favorably by the nation. If you know the book of Jonah, what's God going to tell Jonah to do next? What's wrong with that? Why?
They're the wicked people.
They were the enemies of Israel. That's right. And they had brought a great deal of persecutions, and they were a terrible nation when it came to the way they would conduct war and so on. So anyway, that's all we know about Jonah. Now, concerning the whole book, how is the book viewed? There was a member of the church that he didn't believe the book of Jonah, the events that happened in the book of Jonah were real. I sat in his living room, and he said, "You're telling me that you really believe that a fish swallowed a man and he was in that belly of the fish for 3 days?" I said, "I do." He said, "David, that's silly. That can't happen. It couldn't." And I said, "Not naturally. But this was a miracle by God." And I firmly believe that. But there are people who view the whole book of Jonah as an allegory, as something other than historical fact. But Jesus gives credence to this, and this is important. Jesus viewed this as a genuine event. Let me read this to you. Matthew chapter 12, verse 39 and 40, 39 through 41. "But he answered and said to them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will rise up in judgment with this generation and condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And indeed, a greater than Jonah is here." So Jesus gives credence to the fact that the events of Jonah were true and were accurate. It was historical. If not, Jesus would not have quoted the events of Jonah, would not have referred to it. Okay, some things concerning Nineveh. Nineveh was one of the older nations. In the book of Genesis, if memory serves me right, it was chapter 10 that Nineveh is mentioned. So the Assyrian nation, Nineveh is its capital, was a very old nation. It said, maybe I'll wait till we get a little closer.
It's in Genesis chapter 10. It's in verse 11, talking about some of the nations that were being built. That talk about like Nimrod, who was a mighty one on the earth, or before the Lord. And he says in verse 11, he went to Assyria and built Nineveh. Nineveh's part of I think Nineveh became the capital of the Assyrian Empire.
Correct. Yeah, and we'll talk more about that, the size, etc., in a little bit later. All right, let's go ahead and start the text. Jonah, chapter 1, verse 1. "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." Several things. Nineveh, as Jacob suggested, if you heard him, is the capital of Assyria. God told him it was a great city. Now, what does that mean in context? Does that mean it's the most beautiful place and the people are so nice and it's just a wonderful vacation place? What does it mean when he says that great city? How do you interpret that?
Great in size.
Yeah, great in size. A little bit later, well, in the 4th chapter, the commentary that I've been reading suggests that the amount of people would have been something like, and this is an estimate, no one knows for sure, but he estimated to be probably 600,000 people. Well, that's a lot of people. And he says, "Go cry to Nineveh, that great city." I think he's talking about, again, the amount of people there, great in size, "and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." Now, there's some interesting things that I've discovered, at least interesting to me, about why now? During this time of Jeroboam II, and we can judge the time frame, historically, Nineveh was going through a difficult time. There was turmoil. There was to the point of having even civil, I don't know that I'd call it civil wars, but there was civil unrest in the nation. And there were a lot of internal problems. When those kind of problems occur, how often is it that people are ready to listen? And that seems to be the case here, that during all this internal torment or problems within the city of Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, that there was a lot of problems going on, a lot of infighting, and some people even said depression. I don't know. And I'm talking about the folks that I read describing the city of Nineveh at this time period. That may have been why God said, their wickedness is great. It's come up unto me. Now's the time to go see them. Not when they're on top of the world, not when everything's great, but now that they are in a depressed state as a nation, now's the time I'm going to take the message to them. That makes sense, if that be the case. But he says their wickedness has come up before me. Now, I don't know how much you know about Assyria. Assyria was a mighty, or had been, would be again, a mighty power militarily. They had a theory. Their theory was to be like, have you ever seen a house cat come upon a mouse? That mouse may run at first, but when it knows it's going, it just freezes up. It's almost like Connie and I've got chickens. This is our third or fourth run of chickens. We usually keep them till they die off, and then we'll get more if we want them. But my point is, if a chicken ever think, we have let them out some, but fox just usually end up starting to get them. We have to put them in. But if one gets out, it'll run from you until you get so close, and then it just does that, and you reach down and pick it up. At least that's been our experience. Their thought was to be so malicious to their enemies that we won't have to go to war. We can simply threaten them, and they'll compete in the sense of paying us taxes or whatever, that we won't have to go there. They were notorious about going into a country, and the people that they would take, they would often skin alive. They would stretch them out, and they would literally skin them while they were living. Do you think that didn't have an impact? That wasn't told? The people of Assyria, they have found documentations where, let me go back. We've all been to the doctor, and we often in doctors' offices, or if you've ever been in college biology, maybe even high school, you'll see pictures of the muscle system. In other words, here's an arm, and here's the biceps and the muscles and the legs and how they run and so forth. Well, they had those kinds of paintings where they would skin their victims, and they would draw out the muscles, different muscles of the arms and the thighs, the glutes, and so on. And they were accurate, because that's one of the things, the way they would treat enemies that they had subdued. Not everyone, but you get the idea. They were violent, and they wanted people to fear them. Well, they had been in conflict with Israel. And here was God telling Jonah, go preach to your enemy. In essence, that's what it was, the physical nation of Israel's enemy. Now, earlier I said this would come into play. The only recorded work of Jonah was prophesying to King Jeroboam II, who wasn't a good man, but God apparently led him to restore again the borders of the nation. They were prosperous. And here's this good prophet. How's he going to be viewed if he goes over here and he tries to keep the people's enemy from perishing? Yeah. How many people here hate the Japanese? No one, I hope. I worked, one of my first jobs, I was working with an elderly, I say elderly man, he was still working. He was in his 60s, but he was in World War II. He was a Marine. If you know your World War II history, in the Pacific region at least, they were, once after Midway, they got to a point where they were island hopping. They were getting closer and closer to Japan. They wanted to have bases close enough to Japan. They could, bring their bombers, runways, bombers, bomb them, and so on. Well, he was one of those Marines that was going from island to island. He was in Saipan at that island, at that occasion. That man grimaced when you mentioned the Japanese. He didn't call them Japan or Japanese. He called them Japs. He said, I despise them. I hate them. Why? Because he saw so many of his friends killed. You know, the bloodshed and the different things. And he had saw some of them, the things that they had done to some of the local people and so on. What I'm saying is he fought these people and he saw so many of his friends wounded and killed. So he had a different perspective than we do. All right? I don't view the Japanese in an evil or a bad, but he did. I was told by another person who's probably many of you would know that he too was in World War II. And how many of you ate Japanese food? No, probably most all of you. His family was going to take him out for his birthday, and they were going to take him to a Japanese restaurant. And he freaked out on them, we would call it. He said, I'm not eating there. He said, they'll poison you. He said, I don't trust. Why? Because he had faced some of those type people. Different age, different culture, different time period. Sure, it's during war. But my point being in bringing all this up, here was Jonah, a part of Israel, knowing that Assyria was their enemy, had no doubt killed many, and they were hated among the Israelite people. And now God's telling him, you go over here and save these people? You go over here and you help them turn? You remember when Jonah later went into the city, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown, and he couldn't wait to see it happen. Well, he didn't want to go. I'm this favored prophet of Israel, and now you're telling me to betray my own people? That's probably the way you viewed it. To go over here and preach to the enemy? So what's he do? All right, verse 3. But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish, so he paid the fare. That's a sermon. He paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So what does he decide to do? I'm going to run away from it. It wasn't ambiguity. I didn't understand what God said. It wasn't clear. Oh, it was very clear. He understood. He knew what God required. But he decided he's not going to do it. He's not going to do it. And if you go back over to chapter 4, Jonah explains, we've kind of hinted around it, but he explains why he fled. Turn over to the 4th chapter. Look at verse 2. He tells us why he left, why he fled. Chapter 4, verse 2, so he prayed to the Lord and said, Ah, Lord, was not this what I said when I was still in my country? Therefore I fled previously to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious and merciful God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, one who relents from doing harm. God, I knew that you'd forgive them. He didn't want them to be forgiven. He wanted God to destroy them. And he said, I'm not going to preach to these heathen. So he goes down to Joppa. Joppa would have been a port there on the Mediterranean Sea. There he found a ship or a boat. He paid the fare. What does that mean? Yeah, he bought a ticket. He bought his passage. He paid whatever the amount was to have him board this ship and to go to the destination that he was wanting to go to, Tarshish. But I would say that there's also or I would twist it a different way. He paid the fare thereof. Did he realize what was going to happen? Did he think it through? Did he think he could really escape the command of God? And I wonder what he paid for is what I'm kind of getting at. What did he get for his money? Wasn't what he was thinking. Yeah, and an experience that Wow. I don't know. We'll get to chapter 2 soon enough. But anyway, he paid the ferry, goes down, gets on a ship. He's headed to Tarshish. I'm convinced he would have already had the writings of David. This was King Jeroboam II. David had written many of the Psalms. And turn over to Psalm 139. And what I'm getting at, the psalmist surely makes it clear that God, He's everywhere. We can't escape Him. Drop down to verse 7. Psalm 139, verse 7. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you're there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. For you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that thy soul knows very well. So I would assume that he would have known about the writings of David. Surely he would have known that, there were some people in that day and time that believed there was the God of the hills and the God of the valleys, the God of the seas and the God of something else. Well, it wasn't the picture of these men. They would have known. It was the God of heaven and earth. As a matter of fact, later on in the book, after there's this there's this terrible time at sea, and Jonah even explains about his God. He's a God of all power. He knows why this has come upon them. And later he's even going to tell them, if you want to calm the seas, throw me overboard. But yet, and this is a discussion, I don't think any of us know, but why do you think he got on this ship? Why do you think we know why he was trying to avoid the responsibility of preaching to the Assyrians, the enemies of his people. But why do you think he gets on this boat, though, to leave? What's your thoughts?
He's human.
Good point.
Moses tried to tell God he couldn't speak. Abraham lied about Sarah being his sister. They're human.
Even though with Abraham, you think of a man of such faith that God, Abraham, kill your son, your only son Isaac, and he was going to do it. But yet God had told Abraham, I'll bless you, of your seed, the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. But yet he feared the other nations because his wife was so attractive. He knew that they would try to take her. He said, they'll kill me. And I've often thought what I'm getting at, how he did lack that understanding or faith at the time, and weakness, because he feared for his life. He told them, she's my sister. All right, our classes are coming up, which means I've got to hush. Any other comments as we conclude? It's the opposite, yeah. Right. That's correct. All right, think on that, and we'll pick it up verse 3 or 4 next week, Lord willing, and go forward. This hopefully there'll be a lot of lessons we can learn from the book of Jonah.